Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of System Link. This week for Wednesday, the 5th of March 2025. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mike Hazelton. Mike, it has been a minute since we've been able to shoot an episode. Life has gotten in the way. Trips away, half terms, dad duties at maximum. How are we feeling to be back, catching up on what has been actually a fairly busy few days for gaming news? How's it feeling?
Yeah, it's nice. I've missed it. Well, when I'm away and stuff, or I know there's not a show for a week, and then some big news drops, I always kind of feel bad. So it's
Yeah,
nice to be back to talk about it.
it's become such a part of our routine because we're always talking about these things anyway. System Link came from this idea of us just shooting it stuff that we were already doing and having these conversations anyway. So it does. I've definitely had a hankering for it as well. It's definitely felt a bit odd not being able to share this stuff. And we've got a bunch of headlines to talk through tonight, and then our deep dive will be on the state of one of Xbox's biggest bets, the upcoming Fable reboot, now delayed to 2026. We've got plenty we're going to be talking about on that. We're going to go through our headlines. We're going to kick things off with something that I am so thrilled that has landed so well. Split Fiction from Hazelight, Joseph Fares' latest co-op only game. The reviews have been stellar for Split Fiction across the board, and Eurogamers was a 5-star glowing write-up. I did see one, and I do forget the publication, but they referred to the things changing regularly as getting repetitive, and that's one of the only negative takes I've seen on the game, and I almost immediately dismissed it because it just seems such an oxymoronic point.
Yeah, so varied that it's repetitive.
Yes,
I can kind of, maybe they were trying to say that you can never really get into it because it changes so often. I can kind of understand that point from It Takes Two.
right.
Some of the levels that there was kind of the ice level which I really liked, but you move on from it quite quickly.
Sure.
But it sounds like they explained it really badly, and I don't even know if it's a valid complaint.
Yes, I think actually you've managed to put some quite generous, like that's quite a nuanced
well, I don't know
version
if
of
that's
that.
what they meant.
No, I know. I don't think it is. I think you've put something a bit more nuanced and a bit more detailed on that. The perception I got was when I read the quote from the review, it literally just stated the idea of it being, each level evolving and moving on became a repetitive pattern, and I just feel like that just seems oxymoronic. I just think that's an odd take to have.
It Takes Two wasn't universally acclaimed.
No.
Like I think the gameplay was, but people had criticism about the story, which I think was unwarranted. But whatever. So it's nice to see that this is pretty much getting universal praise.
Yeah, and actually the story was cited as being something that was really, and particularly the ending too, was being cited as something that was really positive. They acknowledged as well, Fares said in an interview with MinMax, that only 51% of people completed It Takes Two. So it's interesting they put so much, and that's why all these reviews are talking about the ending really sticking the landing. It'd be great to get those stats a couple years from now.
Yeah, I would love to know where people dropped off with It Takes Two, because we started playing through it again in kind of preparation for this, and there's a level where it's kind of like a sci-fi level. You're kind of I'm not sure if it's a rocket. You're climbing up a big tower with like a space theme, like Mario Galaxy kind of style, and you go off to different kind of areas, and then you come back and you go up the next level of the tower and you go off to more areas, and it gets really, really repetitive. And I think it's actually the weakest level. And we've stopped. We started playing it like a month ago, and we stopped now. Hopefully, we'll go back to it. But there are a couple in It Takes Two of quite repetitive levels that overstayed their welcome, and then there were some like the ice level, which just reminded me of Banjo-Kazooie and I wanted more time in it.
Yeah, there was a big
but
sandbox.
It sounds like it's a bit.
Yeah, it sounds like
a
they've
bit
addressed
tighter
that.
this time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a sandbox level. I remember with the big pirate ship in the ice. I don't know whether we may be talking about the same one. It was a huge area where some bits you were like diving underwater, and then other bits you were like up on the boat, and it was just awesome. I think we turned a little sort of side mission bit into like an ongoing bit. It was like climbing up something.
Climb the tower.
That's right.
Yeah,
that was great. We sort of a classic you and I sort of going off task and making our own fun. One thing as well, a lot of the reviews, there seems to be some commonality here where they're talking about the difficulty. Some of it's actually quite challenging this time. They've upped the platforming challenge, which is interesting. They really seem like they've clocked the formula now, which is great. And for the first time, cross-play, and that works with the friend pass too. So buying it on PS5, you can invite a friend on Xbox if it doesn't own it, and you can still play together. I just think it is a genius move, and paid dividends with that 20 million sales milestone for It Takes Two. I mean, that's remarkable for a studio that size. Under 100 developers confirmed recently,
Yeah.
which is great. They've retained their independence. That EA Originals deal, which I wanted to look into a bit more to talk about tonight. They EA only recoup their investment in it. There's no ongoing royalty
Oh, really?
for it, so the idea is it's just to fund projects and have the EA branding
Wow.
associated with that. So for them, I think it's more of a PR win. They're seen supporting independent developers.
It'd be interesting to know how it works with EA Play, because whether they have to pay the developers. Presumably, it would just be like a normal relationship with and they. Well, but then nothing else on EA Play would be like that, would it?
No, and
It's
I
all
wonder
EA
because
published stuff.
they've already funded development. It might be just that EA Play
Yeah,
is part of the deal.
but that is quite a big plus for
Yes.
EA. It's definitely great that they just fund development and don't take any profit. But then, there's a good benefit to them of having it on EA Play.
Yeah, for sure.
I did see they did like a funny trailer for a
I saw
video for
this.
the friend
The
pass
friend
with Farah's
pass.
in, which was
Yeah. And did you I
was
don't know if
good.
this came across, but it definitely something that struck me. It looked like they spent some money on that trailer. The
Yeah.
lighting
Well,
and the budget seemed like it was actually quite expensive.
yeah, like it was nice to see him putting his face on the game because
Yeah.
we all see him getting involved. But it was also notable really that they're pushing the friend pass. It's like a reason to
Yeah.
get the game, which before it was always like a nice extra, a bit like cross play or any of that stuff. Um, so I think it was good that you always wonder if it's one of those features that while it's nice to have it, it's consumer friendly. They don't want to push it too much because they do want people to buy the game.
Sure.
If two friends buy the game themselves, that's obviously preferable for EA. So you wonder if they ever want to talk about it that much. But they're pushing it a lot this time.
Yeah.
I didn't see too much about it for It Takes
No,
Two.
it's become central to their marketing, and it's such a great concept anyway. But like you say, they want to make sure they protect their business, but then the data doesn't lie. Those 20 million sales, the gambit paid off, and people were still willing to invest. They also, I believe, the friend pass actually is a demo itself now. There used to be that, especially with the Way Out, the friend pass didn't access anything unless you were just invited to the game, whereas the friend pass now essentially acts as a demo for the opening couple hours of the game, which you can play
Cool.
obviously with someone. So they've iterated really smartly. It's just completely solidified their viability as a studio. I think Hazelight is going to run and run. I would love to see something divergent from them now. I think Split Fiction is a great culmination of the trilogy of games that they produced. I don't include Brothers in that because that was technically another brand, another developer. Those three games across A Way Out, It Takes Two, and Split Fiction are a lovely trilogy now of unconnected but thematically similar titles. And I would be interested actually in seeing them if they maintain their co-op focus, which I hope they do. I'd love to see Hazelight dive into some slightly more grounded territory and bring the same variation and narrative focus to something that's a bit more grounded and serious. I think there's real scope for that with that studio now to make something really mature. I think that could be a really interesting direction for them. Or they continue on the path they're on, which is telling these big, broad canvas stories that are very fantastical and very exaggerated. I think there's value in both approaches, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I said on the show I was maybe a bit disappointed that it was such an iteration, but they might have felt like with It Takes Two, there was some room for improvement, and maybe
Yeah.
this seems like they've almost perfected it. I also like how they haven't, done anything crazy with the scope of the game. They haven't
No,
doubled the size of the studio to make
a 30-hour game or
triple
something.
A.
Yeah,
Yeah, it seems realistic. But like you say, for the next one, I personally would like to see maybe a bit more of a return to A Way Out, where it's more of a cinematic story that they're telling. The gameplay in A Way Out wasn't the best compared to It Takes Two and
yeah.
what it seems Split Fiction. Like the mini games were fine, but there were some shooting bits that were not great. So it'd be nice if it's a bit more cinematic, and maybe the cameras are in a bit closer. You feel a bit more in the action rather than it feels like you're playing a game at the moment. It's hard to role play as the characters. And I think Ferraz has always talked about how it is very gamey, and it's the mini games, and they're designing it to just be like an ideal co-op
Yeah,
game. And I'd kind of like to see that evolve to be like a co-op, whether it's like a
narrative.
artistic thing or a
Yeah.
cinematic thing, or a bit more of kind of elevate it to the next level.
Well, I think that you've touched on this already. Their restraint, I think, is something I really appreciated. Keeping their team sub 100 developers, keeping the project to 15 hours. Now with side missions as well. There's definitely been. I feel like it is a culmination. It's a really nice iteration of everything that came before, and that is exciting. Big Manny, good evening. Just joining us here live for our live recording. For anyone's catching this on YouTube, Podbean, or Spotify, we record the show every single Wednesday at 9, hopefully 9 o'clock. Not this evening, unfortunately. Life got in the way, but Big Manny, thank you so much for joining us in chat. Junior Newbie God as well, just reminding us that Fragpunk has indeed been delayed. It's in our headlines. We'll be getting to that later. Real shame, actually. I think we were looking at that for this weekend, so we'll have to see where that's going to land. But very excited to see what How Split Fiction pans out. I believe it's out, or if it's not out today, it's out imminently this week, possibly tomorrow. Yeah, so that will be certainly something we look at, sharing our impressions of in the days and weeks ahead. Some interesting console news now across Xbox. We've got Series sales down 50% year on year, as weirdly stock issues continue to persist with that, which
we've talked about before.
Yeah.
I think at Christmas there were stock issues. Apparently, the all digital one I think you can get, but the physical ones you can't. I mean, 50% year on year is pretty bad considering probably the year we're comparing against was also massively down. Like it's been a pretty torrid time. And then we've got rumors of again kind of coming back to rumors that we might get another Xbox next year.
Yeah. The next
from a
gen
few
kicks
places.
off 26.
Nowhere massively reliable, I wouldn't have said, but the stock thing is the one that's kind of making me wonder because it's just weird. Why are they not making sure there's like Series X stock available for people? Are they running the stock down, or are they saving some components back for manufacturing something else? Yeah, it's a weird one.
I have wondered about that. That if we are in fact on the cusp of an earlier next gen arrival than perhaps we thought we would, even though actually it's been we're now 6th year of the gen, right? So it's still 5 years, and there hasn't been a mid-gen refresh to extend that. Hello, Pom Pom. So whether we're kind of looking at them now on the cusp of potentially just biting the bullet and saying, look, we're going to go ahead and continue to iterate on our hardware, and as we've discussed before, the notion of with everything being Xbox, every screen is going to have some kind of Xbox functionality. If now they're trying to find a way to maintain their hardcore faithful, the ones like us who have a library on that platform, trying to find something unique in that platform that comes next is going to be their big challenge, I think, especially as the consoles have weirdly become more like PCs with their off-the-shelf components and stuff that's a bit more consistent with the PC space. It'll be interesting to see where this shakes out. I'm not so convinced that we're going to get that in 26, but it seems to be that there is certainly reasonable evidence that points to that being a possibility. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'd prefer it wasn't next year. I think it's too soon. I think the Series X has plenty more to give. I appreciate there's quite a gap now between like Series X and high-end PC.
Yeah.
But to make a console that can compete with high-end PC, it's just insane. The cost is not realistic. So I don't see the value in making something in 26 that's going to be like PS5 Pro or higher price, which I feel like it will be if it's going to be a step up. So
yeah,
the only thing is they will potentially have a really good lineup of games in 26 if they were thinking about holding some stuff back for it.
Yeah, and whether they go the cross-gen strategy or they use cloud to be cross-gen and force those games to be native. I actually think that would be the smartest play, is that they make it so those games like Gears E-Day or State of Decay 3, they're only on the next Xbox, but you can cloud stream them if you want to, which is
Well,
yeah,
you know what would be good is if there was a high-end Xbox that you could cloud stream. So you're cloud streaming the ultra settings of your Xbox games because at the moment we're streaming Series X versions of games
yes.
that are on PC that you can play with ultra settings. So it'd be nice if there kind of was a higher tier that you could get access to.
A bit like GeForce Now, isn't it? That kind of concept of that
Exactly.
you can get
Yeah.
that sort of upper tier of that. Just seeing Junior Newbie God and Big Manny in the chat talking about Monster Hunter Wilds, 1.4 million concurrent Steam players, so it's had a really, really strong launch. That series seems to be continuing to be just go from strength to strength, really. Another Capcom win. Junior Newbie God stating, I'm really enjoying it, and I picked it up a few hours ago. And Big Man is saying, all my friends are obsessed with it too. Makes me want to try it out. And that is often the arc, isn't it? When these series suddenly break through, much like the Resident Evil reboots have suddenly found a new audience. You see, and obviously Dragon's Dogma 2 was a huge success for Capcom as there as well. It's just nice to see that continue to evolve and spread its wings. And they've clearly it's resonating in the community. It was interesting to see how some of the reviews talked about some of the performance on PC was a bit hit and miss. We've had a few ports to PC and a few versions of games that we've seen sort of not land quite as solidly from a technical standpoint. There's been enough examples of that now. And given the importance of PC space, and that's where the growth is, certainly on the subscription side, you would think that that would become a priority for these guys to get that optimization right. But
Yeah, I feel like as well, because of Digital Foundry and also the price that people are paying for graphics cards, if you fuck it up and people aren't getting the performance they expect from the graphics cards that they spent thousands of pounds on, and it doesn't take much for Digital Foundry to they just drop a slightly negative comment about something
it snowballs.
to do with PC
Yeah.
performance, and it's just like a game gets completely lambasted. But yeah, you need to get it right. It should be the priority for me. Anyone that isn't like a Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo need to be prioritizing PC as the first platform they
Yeah.
make sure they get it right.
It's where the community's growing. So, if the console base is stagnating and you're finding new ways to engage players elsewhere, why not double down on that platform that's become very mainstream? It's not the niche space that it once was. Steam is a behemoth for a reason, right? And there's enough space, even with stuff like Epic Games Store, to carve their own part of that pie. So it's clearly doing well enough to warrant the investment and warrant the focus from publishers. Junior Newbie God mentioning as well that I just love being a small person, just tanking and demolishing enemies like 5 times your size. Feels amazing with visuals that are really incredible, almost like an Elden Ring vibe. I've actually never jived particularly with Monster Hunter because of it feels like, you're attacking sponges. It's the kind of sponge damage approach when you're attacking enemies with damage numbers coming off. I don't particularly enjoy that as a player, but I can certainly see the attraction, especially from a multiplayer standpoint, if you're able to do that with a squad and it's a big scale thing and you feel like you're taking on a titan, something really impressive. I can definitely see the draw for players for that. So flipping gears now back to Xbox, I feel like these numbers actually were better for Avowed than people were expecting. 6 million players in the first month. I know that Obsidian, without being too specific, did say that it still sold well on PC, because of course the Steam numbers don't reflect Game Pass downloads, they're actual purchases, so still looking really healthy. But that's really strong engagement. That is actually higher players than we got for Indie when that first dropped.
Yeah, which considering that's a license, you know, and
Yeah.
Avowed is effectively a new IP, even though it's
and
based on previous.
it's Obsidian. Like I feel like we overuse the phrase "swimming in sevens." Sevens is harsh for that, but they're sort of swimming in eights. I feel like Obsidian sits around that 8. They're the 8 out of 10 factory, where you've got Grounded, Pentiment, Outer Worlds, now Avowed. They have been one of the MVPs, I think, of this Xbox generation for variation, consistency, and just having this sort of very clear pipeline with their projects. I feel like they're hitting release dates for the most part. The Avowed delay, I think, actually was more about release cadence rather than the game not being ready, given that it was a relatively short delay. I think actually they were expecting Assassin's Creed Shadows to launch before Christmas. I think actually a lot of that was getting out of the way of that. So it's just weird how that's now shaked out. You've got Assassin's Creed Shadows coming out really soon. But just a great success for that team. That just showing great engagement and another good month for Game Pass in February there to have that land so well. And then we're following up pretty soon with, my inevitable Gotti, South of Midnight, coming soon.
Yeah,
Get it locked
yeah,
in.
it'll be interesting to see
How that lands.
because you can. I think you can still use the Steam numbers as indicative. Like I think it's still did better than Hellblade and Indie on Steam, and then seems to have sold. Not sure if we ever got Hellblade numbers, but it seems to have sold better than, or at least had more active players than either of those, which
Yeah,
is good. And
absolutely.
yeah, I think for me it would be my favorite or most valuable developer of this generation for Xbox, just because of the quantity and the quality.
Yes.
Whereas you have people like Playground who are probably more, the games that they produce are better, but they're a lot less frequent. So it depends. It's a bit of a toss up. And when you've got a service like Game Pass, you do need quantity. If you can churn out, a game that scores eights and is, whatever, 10 to 20 hours long, you can do that every 2 years or 3 years. That's amazing.
That is.
Um,
And to have multiple teams working on those projects too, having the grounded team, the Pentiment offshoot, and then the main team focusing on Avowed and Outer Worlds, that's a really cool cadence for them to stick to.
yeah, and presumably we'll have Outer Worlds 2 probably in the next couple of years. I don't know if they've confirmed a year for it, but
No confirmed year. I would imagine 26, right?
yeah, which is great.
Which is,
Two decent RPGs, one after the other like that from the same studio.
I'd like to see coming into the summer showcase, I'd like to see just something that isn't Call of Duty click into place for Xbox's end of year now. The Fable is a big gap that has been created with that delay. We'll get to that obviously a bit later in the show, but I think having teams like having teams like Obsidian producing stuff like Avowed so consistently, I think is a real get from Microsoft, and definitely, like you say, they are the MVP, certainly, of their first party right now. I know I mentioned South of Midnight, but I don't think there's any guarantee. If I'm going to just try to be as objective as I can, I don't think there's any guarantee of that kind of engagement. I think Avowed has actually surpassed expectations a little bit there. There's no promise that South of Midnight is going to connect in the same way. Compulsion's last game, We Happy Few, was divisive. It wasn't a surefire hit, but they definitely, from contrast to We Happy Few, you could see the progression, and I think South of Midnight represents that next meaningful step. It's certainly their most ambitious, most polished title looking visually to date. So whether it maybe carves a slightly niche audience for itself remains to be seen.
I think it does because of the subject matter as well, and it's going down a slightly artistic route. That Avowed is very much like like comfy game that you play. It feels like all the other RPGs that are out there. It's not doing anything particularly innovative. In the same way that, Dragon Age is the exception, but I would have expected Dragon Age. I wonder if it's because of some of the discourse around Dragon Age and also, BioWare's reputation kind of being slightly tarnished. But yeah, I would expect it to have been like to not do quite as well as Avowed. I think just have to be
that's fair
about that. But might score, but you never know.
I have lost you slightly here, Mike. Having a bit of a technical wonkiness now. Don't know whether you can you still hear me?
I do, yeah.
So you've frozen on the stream view. Let's see if we can address that. Looks like it's desperately trying to catch up with itself. Can you still see and hear me, right?
Yeah, going a bit now.
Yeah, we're definitely having some wonkiness here.
That seems to be okay now.
That seems to have stabilised. Yeah, that was weird. We synchronised on that. Junior Newbie God, just circling back to Grounded, was saying, I wish Grounded had different maps and environments after The Garden. It was a great game. Yeah, I think it was... Perhaps that's a sort of a consequence of its scope. It wasn't something that was too broad, and actually that's to their credit that they kept that laser focused. I appreciate Hazelight for that as well. We talked about, them scaling split fiction appropriately. I think that, but I think certainly from a DLC perspective, we could have seen maybe some new environments, new expansion areas introduced, and who knows whether it's had its multi-platform release. We might see that then continue to evolve down the line, or even just a sequel arrive. But kicking things off now again with just a couple of quick news items. We had the Tony Hawk's 3 and 4 announcement with the Doom crossover. I love that they snuck the Doom Slayer in there. It's great to see the fact that you've now got Activision, Bethesda under one roof, and they're able to have that synergy. I was hoping we'd see more of that, and that's fun. Special edition announced. You've got a Game Pass day one release. It's multi-platform. Great to see actually something come out of Activision that's not just COD or relying on the mobile titles. This is really what Game Pass is for, is launching a title like that, which has such fondness attached to it. Looks crisp. I don't really have a history with Tony Hawk, because I was PlayStation up to... I jumped in on from the PS3 onwards, so in the era when people were typically playing Tony Hawk at its height, I imagine it was sort of PS2 era. That seemed to be where it was most popular. So just a really cool announcement. I just think that was really, really well timed and a nice little win for them. Oh, Julian Newby got mentioned. He kind of wants another Trials Fusion. I love the Trials games.
Oh,
yeah,
Trials.
Great. Trials is great. Got real fond memories of that. Also, we had confirmation, a real last minute one, this one, that Fragpunk has been delayed on console. Looks like it's still getting a PC release on time, but the console version's been delayed indefinitely with no confirmation exactly when that's going to drop. Always respect a developer for knowing that it's not in a fit state. When you're a free-to-play game, wading into a really crowded space, you can't afford a shit launch, especially on console. That's where the news
so
will start to
close
spread.
to launch, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it makes me a bit. I don't know if uneasy is the right word. Like, if it's not in a fit state, they would have known it's not in a fit state on console, weeks ago, months ago. We played the test and it was good.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't really technically in a bad state. It was just balancing, which would be the same on PC. So, yeah, interesting to know exactly what the issue is there. And also, we haven't got a date. Like, we don't know if it's going to be weeks, months.
Yeah, it's unclear at this stage. I think it's perhaps quite telling of the timing is that this could have been a case if they thought they could resolve it. Like you said, they would have known for a while. Perhaps it was just a case if they had to pull a trigger and make the call, rather than risk it coming out in such a dreadful state that the perception of the game's then tanked forever. They want longevity,
I remember,
from that. So
I was really looking forward to Cities Skylines 2, which was originally PC and console. I think the console release was maybe slightly after PC, but I don't think there was a huge amount of time. And then it launched on PC in a bad state, and they just basically cancelled the console version. We still haven't had it yet. So hopefully it's nothing like that, because it was a really fun game to play.
Absolutely. Speaking of fun games to play, you and I dived into the open alpha for Splitgate 2
Amazing,
recently.
it was.
Oh, that landed well. That was a great time. For any of you that aren't familiar, the first Splitgate dropped at a time when Halo was, been delayed. It was really struggling, and suddenly this very Halo 2-esque arena shooter with the portal mechanic then dropped almost out of nowhere, and then took on a life of its own and became hugely successful. Splitgate 2 has now opened up its alpha testing phase. It's looking pretty polished. I think that felt more like a beta to me. It was obviously very limited in scope in terms of modes and maps, but my goodness, that gameplay connected. Our stream of that is one of our most enjoyable I think we've done for a while, and we truly were diving in, not sure quite what to expect in terms of any iterations and changes. It feels very iterative in that sense, but also very polished. That game is in a good state. And I came away from that feeling good, especially from the sort of team deathmatch and one of the the zone control objective modes that we played.
Definitely. Like, I wish we could play it tonight. That's a good sign. I think the first game definitely the gameplay felt amazing, but it felt really bare bones in terms of content. Whereas they seem to have addressed that this time. I don't know if I'm just misremembering, but it feels like there's a lot more customization options and the perks loadouts and things like that.
Being able to add upgrades to your guns and then choosing perks for your character with the abilities associated with it. I don't feel like any of that was in play when we were playing that, and it's a really nice deepening of those mechanics, which I'm really appreciating. Certainly as someone that obviously really enjoyed the first one too, to see them really double down. It's Unreal Engine 5, it's running beautifully even on console at this stage. They're calling it an alpha, I guess, maybe just for branding or sort of saving themselves from any network issues and things like that. But my goodness, what a polished experience that was.
To be honest, I feel like if you're able to deploy an alpha on console simultaneously with PC, then you're a lot further ahead than like most
an alpha would suggest.
Developers, because normally alpha's PC only in a lot of cases. because it's probably quite hard to simultaneously develop for all the platforms at
Yeah.
the same time. Um, but yeah, it's great. I think their issue will be player retention, and I think they've done some stuff to address that. And it will just be when like Call of Duty comes out. I don't think we've got a date for Splitgate 2, but it's just I think if a big game comes out that has the potential to draw people away,
Yeah.
they could really do with someone, if they don't already have them, with expertise in like battle passes and the seasonal content and things to keep people coming back. Because I think the first game people liked it for it, but the first game didn't really have any of that stuff. It was like we're not the typical free to play
Right.
game with all the cosmetics
Which
and loot boxes and things,
it's an
which was a
argument to be
nice thing.
made. It's nice, but it's a point of differentiation. But for longevity reasons, you might need to
Yeah, I
embrace
think
some
it
of
hurt
that
them.
thinking.
Yeah.
Um, I've come away from that hankering for more. So Alpha has done its job, which is really great to see. So this evening, our big deep dive topic is on Fable, the recent delay to 2026. Again, no, we never actually had a date. We knew it was 2025. We had just sort of reasonably assumed it was going to be the end of this year. And now it's been pushed to calendar year 26 with no specified release calendar at all within that. We don't know any which quarter it's going to drop. I imagine it would be, if 2026 ends up being a new Xbox console, do they now hold it back as a launch title?
Well, that's what I was wondering. Yeah.
Could be very interesting there. Some of the footage that was released alongside the announcement that we saw, there was a bit of a preview around it, and we saw some gameplay, visually looking very polished, and the animation's good. I wasn't too sold on the combat. It still looked very early, and actually anything that they can do now to maybe iterate on that and add a little bit more of a polished pass on it, because it was looking a bit stiff for me, that combat. Fable, not particularly known for its combat. It's not something like the Middle Earth games like Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, those sort of third-person sword combat games that are very smooth, very slick. I wasn't expecting it quite to that level, but it did look a little stiff for me. I wasn't particularly enamored with that. Loved the creature designs and loved the world, the color palette, and very, very much that fantasy British forest vibe, which is what you want from something like Albion in a Fable game. So it's definitely unproven in that sense for me. I think Playground Games have a lot to show us in terms of are they able to deliver a proper third person RPG combat. But
I think
yeah,
similar to South of Midnight for me, I don't like the look of the combat in South of Midnight particularly, but I love the story and I
yeah,
love the world in Fable. So and I do this with quite a lot of adventure games, RPG games now, as I kind of am just playing them for the story because I'm not
yes.
that great at combat in quite often, especially in third person games. So I just want to get to the next conversation option or the next narrative point and
Yeah,
kind of
that's an
breeze
interesting
through.
point actually, because if mechanically the game is serviceable, but the story and the context and the reason for why you're doing that combat has really hooked you and got you, I'm certainly like that. I can kind of live with it being sort of fairly by the numbers and just sort of doing its job if I know that the reason behind why I'm doing that actually matters and I'm invested in the characters. So I think that's where South of Midnight potentially will still get me. It's where Fable will still get me, because the world is something I want to be in. The characters that I'm not only am I playing but also interacting with are ones that I'm invested in and care about. That then often mitigates any issues with combat mechanics. It's the feel
Yeah,
for me. Getting through the world has to feel, navigating the levels has to feel smooth, even if the combat is more serviceable, which is where I struggle with The Witcher. I found the combat serviceable, it was fine, but the actual navigating environments I found really awkward, particularly vaulting and interacting with stuff in The Witcher I felt really, really forced. So I think if they can nail the feel of movement, even if the combat ends up being just kind of by the numbers, as long as the story's then hooking me in, I'm there.
I think given the cutscenes, well, sorry, given the trailers that we've seen so far have all focused on, the narrative element, and they've had really strong voice actors. They put a lot of focus on getting well-known voice actors to do them. Um, it suggests it's kind of narrative first. Whereas interestingly
Yeah.
with South of Midnight, they showed us gameplay quite early, or certainly representative footage quite early. Whereas with Fable, it was all about the cutscenes and the characters almost from the
Yeah,
start.
they're all very in-engine, always showing us the kind of like
Yeah.
the world building and the characters' interactions. Junior Newbie God mentioning, I recently went back to Dishonored 2 and Watch Dogs, but they feel like games I play now compared to most new games. Yeah, there's certain titles that I think mechanically have aged beautifully. Dishonored, particularly of the ones you mentioned there, I think is feels really, really smooth. My wife and I completed the first game together and the second game actually, and had a blast playing both of them. They really landed well for us because of that, because the mechanics felt so polished and well iterated upon. Is there anything particular that you'd like to now? We've got a minute now. We've got room to speculate about where Fable's heading and what we're going to see. I'm a big fan of a boss fight. Split Fictions showing their boss fights. We've seen a couple hints of that. It Takes Two had some really memorable ones as well. I remember fighting a big Hoover early on in It Takes Two, which was good fun. What would you? I'd like to see some meaningful boss encounters in Fable. I think there's really good scope for that, given its fantasy setting. Is there anything in particular now that we've got a minute to speculate on where Fable's heading? Is there anything you particularly want to see from this reboot for you as a player?
I just want them to knock it out the park. I think they need Xbox needs a 90 plus scoring game.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want them to push things to the scope too far. But I also I'm quite happy with the direction the story and the humor, especially, is taking compared to the originals, which I know some people are maybe not as comfortable with. But I want the world and the way the combat is handled to be relatively similar. Like, I don't want it to go too far down the route where your combat encounters are like it closes you off in an arena and it feels more like a typical RPG. I want it to feel like Fable felt, where you're walking down a lane and an enemy jumps out and you attack them in the lane and then you
Yeah.
carry on and stuff. I don't want any changes to that kind of formula. But yeah, something that I still don't know with Avowed particularly is I just want the world to feel truly like alive in the way that Peter Molyneux was suggesting, with the trees growing over time and all that stuff. I don't need that in there, but I need it to feel like a vibrant, living
Yes,
world, and for there to be towns with people in and shops and
I want to be able to
all
buy a
that.
house still. I want to be able to buy property, and I loved becoming like a bit of a tycoon in one of the I think it was the third Fable game. Bought like
Yeah,
a bunch
third
of
one.
houses and then never moved in. I sort of became like a sort of shitty landlord for like a whole section of town. I really liked that flavor, and of course, Fable 3, you were the king, weren't you? And you were sort of the choices you were making were affecting your kingdom, which I really liked the scale of that. It might have been the second one actually, Fable 2, that I became the the property tycoon. But I really enjoyed those mechanics and being able to do your furniture, and like there was actually quite a bit of depth to those systems, even though they were fairly secondary in terms of the grand scope of the game. I'd like to see that still be a thing. Ownership over spaces and property, and I think that leaving your mark on the world, I think, is something that there is definitely in the DNA of Fable. I'd like to see that again. Judy Newbie God mentioning that, hoping for some better disguises because he really liked the old games. I think that's fair. So different outfits and stuff that can then have real world impacts in the title. I feel like open worlds would be amazing. Starfield was great, but I wish it had more exploration to it. Most of the planets just felt like wastelands, but had so much potential. I am always in favour of a smaller scale but curated space to explore versus AI generated scale.
Because Fable, I feel like, has always been pretty tight.
Very crafted, and I like that about it.
Yeah, like you couldn't go off the paths much, could you?
No.
But they similar again to Obsidian games. They feel like an open world, but then they're not, and none of it's procedurally generated. None
Yeah.
of it's like wasteland. It's all someone has put every tree and every rock in the game world, which I think you can tell.
That definitely comes across in the Veilguard, playing through Dragon Age, just fresh in my mind right now, and that feels very bespoke and very shaped, and I think that's a really cool concept. Oh, it's always you've achieved something on Twitch when you've got a bot coming in. Please excuse me while I eliminate them from the world if I can. I'm not sure I have the power to do that from my settings right now. That's hilarious. No, I don't. I don't have the power right now to do it with my setup. I need to look at that. So that will just about wrap it up for the latest episode of System Link 4. Wednesday the 5th of March 2025. You can find us on all of the platforms: Threads, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, and of course our Discord at Burly Bird Media. Please do consider giving us a follow if you're not already. You can then catch all of our video on demand content and podcast content on our YouTube channel as well, for free across Podbean and Spotify as well. We just recently posted the latest episode of Tag and Bag, my generational podcast featuring the legendary Jeff Steitzer from Halo, one of our all-time favourite performers, and we are thrilled to have him as part of our family here at Burly Bird. New episodes of that will be going up throughout the next few weeks. Also going to be shooting a new episode of Dulcet Tones with the legendary Stephen Murray. You might have seen him in our chat as Murdog. He's in our Discord as well. Very much looking forward to be able to sharing that. And also we have just finished recording an interview with John Billingsley, Dr. Phlox from Star Trek Enterprise, a prolific character actor who has appeared in multiple different projects, and we had an absolute blast talking to him. So plenty of good stuff coming up on our channels and our various social networks on the way for the next few weeks. Mike, where can people find you?
TheXboxGuide.com and at the Xbox Guide on the various places. What have I got coming up? Game Pass review for February will be up hopefully by the end of this week.
Nice. Fabulous. Well, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Great to see you again, Junior Newbie God and Big Manny. Glad you checked out the podcast there, dude. Just saw that in chat. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
See ya.